Good morning. My name is Kelly Trombley-Freitag, and I serve on your DuPage UU Church Board of Trustees. We want to welcome everyone this morning to our open and inclusive virtual community. As Unitarian Universalists, we hold that there are many spiritual paths to truth and meaning, and pledge to support one another as we explore these paths. We are so glad you were able to find us and join us for our live stream service today. Please check the church website at www.dupageuchurch.org for updates. If you search under DuPage UU Church on Facebook, you will find a number of ways to be in community with us as well. Thank you.
Our opening words are by Frederick Buechner. Who knows whether there is life on any other planet anywhere in the universe, but there is life on this planet. And what is life like? Think of not knowing what life is and then finding out. A book suddenly learning how to read. A rock jutting out into the sea, suddenly knowing the thump and splatter of the waves, the taste of salt. You are alive. It needn't have been so. It wasn't so once, and it will not be so forever. But it is so now. And what is it like to be alive in this maybe one place of all places anywhere where life is? Live a day of it and see. Take any day and be alive in it. And as we light the chalice flame, these words by George Kimmick Beach. In the mystery of life about us, there is light. It gives us a place to be, to grow, to rejoice together. It opens the pathways to love. Our opening hymn is number 298, Wake Now, My Senses.
Senses and hear the earth call, feel the
Please join me in the spoken affirmation of our church. Love is the spirit of this church, and service its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another.
It is time to gather. My story today will have a familiar character, Henry the Bear. I've shared 2 other stories about Henry in Henry Builds a Cabin and Henry Hikes to Fitchburg. And these stories are based on the life of Henry David Thoreau. Today's story is Henry Works by D.B. Johnson. It is a misty, muzzling morning. Henry steps out the door and sniffs the air. It's a perfect day to walk to work. Henry stops beside the pond to dig comfrey root. Channing walks by. "Henry," he says, "you're not doing anything today. Come fishing with me." "Not today," says Henry. "I'm walking to work." And Henry puts the comfrey root in his hat and walks down the path. From the top of a hill, Henry sees clouds far away. It has been a dry summer, but he knows it will rain today. The rain will not come until afternoon, so Henry fills his cup with water and sprinkles it on the milkweed flowers. Hosmer meets him on the path. "Are you being a rain cloud today, Henry?" he asks. "I'm walking to work," Henry says. At the brook, Henry cuts a pole from a pine branch. With it, he pushes 3 crossing stones into place. He puts the pine needles in his hat with the comfrey root. Henry tramps the trail across Hosmer's field and finds a fox's den. Mrs. Hosmer is sitting at her front window. Henry calls to her. "Keep your chickens inside tonight. There's a fox around," he says. And he leaves a branch of sweet-smelling pine on her window ledge. In town, Henry meets the postmaster. "Henry," he says, "I can't walk on my sore foot. Since you're not working, can you take this letter to Emerson?" "I'm walking to work right now," Henry says, "but I'll take it to him on my way." And Henry takes the comfrey root out of his hat and gives it to the postmaster. It will make his foot better. Henry finds Emerson in his garden and gives him the letter. Emerson says, "The woodchucks are eating everything in my garden, Henry." "I can take care of the woodchucks," says Henry. "I'll bring them out of the country on my way to work." And Henry plays his flute, and the woodchucks run to him. He tucks one in each pocket and walks off through the woods. In Alcott's field, where Henry sets the woodchucks free, he finds a patch of wild strawberries, and he digs up some of the plants and puts them in his hat. Mrs. Alcott is hanging shirts to dry in the yard. "You'll have to bring in those shirts soon," Henry tells her. "It's going to rain in an hour." And Henry walks along the road to Hawthorne's house, and inside the fence, the garden is growing wild with grapes and raspberries. And Henry takes the strawberry plants out of his hat and finds a perfect place for them in Mrs. Hawthorne's garden. It starts to rain, and Henry walks in the millbrook, measuring the shallow water as he goes. Soon he meets old Flint sitting on the bank. "Are you taking a bath, Henry?" asks Flint. "No," says Henry, "I'm just walking to work." And Henry climbs out of the brook and into the middle of a big huckleberry bush, and he crawls under it to cut away the tangles and pick berries until his pockets are full. And Henry marks a path from the road to the huckleberry bush. As Henry walks down the path to his cabin, he meets Channing. carrying a fishing pole, and he shows Henry the big fish that he's caught. "Did you just go to work, Henry?" he asks. "I'm just getting to work now," says Henry. "What is your work?" Channing asks. "It's writing," says Henry. "I'm writing a book." And Henry turns toward his cabin. All day he has taken care of things in the woods and in town. And now he is back where he started. Inside, he lights a fire. He hangs up his hat and coat. And then Henry sits at his desk to begin his book. Today, he writes, "I took a walk in the woods."
Please join us in our song affirmation.
Creative love, our thanks we give. That is our world is incomplete. That struggles creates our will to live. That work awaits our hands and feet.
We hold each other in our hearts and minds with all our joys and all our sorrows. We remember those who are experiencing losses of various kinds and those facing health challenges. We are aware that many are faced with heightened difficulties presented by these times that continue to be challenging for all. Even when the cares of the world weigh on us, may we find joy in our connections with each other and in the pleasures that life holds. Let us care for one another and for ourselves in all the ways we can. As we hold each other in our hearts and minds with all our joys and all our sorrows, whether spoken or unspoken, let's take a moment to be quiet together. This meditation by John Daniel. Among other wonders of our lives, we are alive with one another. We live here in the light of this unlikely world that isn't ours for long. May we spend generously the time we are given. May we enact our responsibilities as thoroughly as we enjoy our pleasures. May we see with clarity. May we seek a vision that serves all beings. May we honor the mystery surpassing our sight. And may we hold in our hands the gift of good work and bear it forth whole, as we were born forth by a power we praise to this one earth, this homeland of all we love. Our meditative hymn is number 83, "Winds Be Still."
Our special collection recipient in August is the Animal Rescue Foundation, a no-kill, all-volunteer, foster-based organization dedicated to rescuing and rehoming homeless cats and dogs. Donations to support the work of DuPage Unitarian Universalist Church are gratefully given and received. To Save or Savor by Richard Gilbert. He begins with a quotation from E.B. White. I arise in the morning, torn between the desire to improve the world and a desire to enjoy the world. This makes it hard to plan the day. I rise in the morning, torn between the desire to save the world or to savor it, to serve life or to enjoy it, to savor the sweet taste of my own joy or to share the bitter cup of my neighbor, to celebrate life with exuberant step or to struggle for the life of the heavy laden. What am I to do when the guilt at my bounty clouds the sky of my vision, when the glow which lights my everyday illumines the hurting world around me? To savor the world or to save it? God of justice, if such there be, take from me the burden of my question. Let me praise my plenitude without limit. Let me cast from my eyes all troubled folk. No, you will not let me be. You will not stop my ears to the cries of the hurt and the hungry. You will not close my eyes to the sight of the afflicted. What is that you say? To save, one must serve. To savor, one must save. The one will not stand without the other.
Some Unitarian Universalists consider themselves Unitarian Universalist Buddhists, or Unitarian Universalist Jews, or Unitarian Universalist Christians, or Unitarian Universalist pagans. I consider myself a Unitarian Universalist, Unitarian Universalist. As Unitarian Universalists, we hold a wide range of beliefs, we celebrate a variety of holidays, and we engage in a diversity of spiritual practices. Our beliefs are based on our reason, our experience, and our sense of what is right. Our celebrations are based on our cultural backgrounds or our sense that a particular metaphor speaks to us. Our spiritual practices are ways of intentionally and regularly focusing our attention, knowing ourselves and the world around us more deeply, and for each of us to help our own spirits get in touch with the spirit of life. Those spiritual practices are drawn from a variety of sources, including the meditation or prayer practices of the world's religions or our own creativity. My friend and colleague Frank Robertson was a serious student of world religions, but he wasn't serious all the time. He once told me a joke that went like this: "What did the Zen Buddhist say to the hot dog vendor? Make me one with everything." This morning, I would like to explore the idea that the goal of spiritual practice is to become one with everything, to become one with the universe, if you will. Some might express this as becoming one with God. I would like to explore the idea that the path to becoming one with everything is to become one with oneself. And I'd like to explore the idea that the pathway is right here in everyday life. In a book called After the Ecstasy, the Laundry, Buddhist monk Jack Kornfield quotes Gary Snyder, Zen teacher, poet, and father. Snyder writes, "All of us are apprenticed with the same teacher, reality. It is as hard to get the children herded into the carpool and down the road to the bus as it is to chant sutras in the Buddha hall on a cold morning. One is not better than the other. Each can be quite boring, and they both have the virtuous quality of repetition. Repetition and its good results make the very activities of our life into the path." So it seems to me that what makes herding the kids into the car as much a spiritual practice as chanting sutras, to use Gary Snyder's terms, is to be paying attention when one is doing it. I'm afraid that mundane tasks are just mundane tasks if I feel fragmented when I am doing them. If my hands are doing the laundry while my mind is elsewhere and my spirit isn't paying attention at all, then I'm just doing the laundry, but I'm not really doing the laundry. Or worse, if I'm talking to someone while my mind is somewhere else and my spirit is not engaged, then I'm not really participating in the conversation. Spiritual practice requires me and teaches me to be fully present, attending to what I am doing while I am doing it. Multitasking is not a spiritual practice. If the path and the goal of spiritual practice is to become one with the universe by becoming one with myself, I must be aware of myself as part of the interdependent web of all existence. Because we are already one with the universe, part of and not apart from our environment, we are connected with one another and have only to recognize our connections. On a form that is required for ministers to earn final fellowship within the Unitarian Universalist Association, one of the questions for the minister and for representatives of a congregation that the minister is serving is whether the minister shows evidence of a spiritual practice. My first response to that question, before I figured out what my written response would be, was, uh-oh. As I recall, the answer I came up with was something about contemplation and conversation, which I do consider to be spiritual practices. And the president of the congregation I was serving at the time gave an answer that was equally true, or perhaps even more true. We suspect that ministry is her spiritual practice. For me, the practice of ministry is the spiritual practice of being human. I frame my calling to ministry as a calling to serve as a designated human being. I'm called to help people in religious community to live their lives fully and creatively, encouraging them to live out the potential and the possibilities within them. For me, my calling to serve as a designated human being works not because I'm smarter or better or holier or more religious or more spiritual or even more rational than anybody else. It works because I am willing to serve. It works because I have certain skills and the willingness to use them. I'm willing to serve as preacher and teacher and listener in my role as minister to a religious community. I have the opportunity to explore questions about life and death and everything in between in deep and meaningful ways. I have the opportunity to be with people in their times of greatest grief and in their times of greatest joy. I have the privilege of showing up as a human being, representing not only myself as a minister, but also representing the congregation that I serve. I am fortunate to have gainful employment in a field that not only is congruent with a spiritual life, but requires it. But this ministry of being human is not exclusive to professional ministers. The hymn, "Wake Now My Senses," speaks of a calling to ministry that I hear as a call to all of us to be fully human. The hymn describes a spiritual practice of full engagement with the world, body, mind, and spirit, fully awake and fully alive. As I mentioned last week in my remarks about practical theology, the Unitarian Universalist theologian James Luther Adams suggested that church is a place where you get to practice what it means to be human. Practicing being human. Isn't that why we are all here? We get to practice being human over and over again, getting better and better at it all the time. Spiritual practice fits into our lives through attention and intention. Spiritual practice that leads us inside ourselves leads us back to community. And spiritual practice that leads us outside ourselves leads us back to our own essential selves in continuing cycle. I have recently discovered the pleasures of not listening to NPR. I used to be afraid that if I didn't listen to the radio whenever I was in the car, I'd be missing something important news of the day or an important interview with somebody important. But one day I forgot to turn on the radio, and I realized that without the radio I could hear myself think. And even though I might not be thinking important thoughts, thinking is important. Just to let the mind wander where it will, not thinking about anything in particular, is a good way to figure out what I think and even what I feel. Cultivating silence, a time to just be quiet, can be a spiritual practice. An authentic Unitarian Universalist spiritual practice is the one practiced by our Unitarian forebear, Henry David Thoreau, who would spend time in nature wrapped in a reverie. To be wrapped in a reverie meant that he would sit quietly outdoors doing nothing in particular, not thinking about anything in particular, just watching the natural world. As Thoreau described his method, "Sometimes I sat in my sunny doorway from sunrise till noon, wrapped in a reverie. amidst the pines and hickories and sumacs in undisturbed solitude and stillness, while the birds sang around or flitted noiselessly through the house, until, by the sun falling in at my west window, or the noise of some traveler's wagon on the distant highway, I was reminded of the lapse of time. I grew in those seasons like corn in the night, and they were far better than any work of the hands would have been. They were not time subtracted from my life, but so much over and above my usual allowance. I realized what was meant by contemplation. Listening, contemplation, or meditation can be practices of silence that nurture our own spiritual selves so they can grow and blossom. The poet John O'Donohue noted that one of the terrible dangers in spirituality and in trying to become aware is to privilege some particular method to take you there, because then the method becomes the end, not the means. O'Donohue said, "I think that being here is it, and that 10,000 times a day you can slow a little and throw one savoring glimpse at the miracle of being around." We practice being human each day of our lives. We practice through attention and intention, paying attention to each other and to our own senses, whatever techniques may help us achieve this. Living mindfully and heartfully is a spiritual practice when we feel scattered or distracted or fragmented. This is the mantra of my spiritual practice, which I have come to think of as the practice of mindful attention. To know what I know, to feel what I feel, to be who I am, one with the universe, one with myself. May it be so for all of us. Our closing hymn is number 128, "For All That Is Our Life."
For all that is our life, we sing our thanks and praise. For all life is a gift which we are called to use to build the common good and make our own days glad. For needs which others serve, for services we give, for work and its rewards, for hours of rest and love, we come with praise and thanks. For all that is our life, for sorrow we must bear, for failures, pain, and loss, for each new thing we learn, for fearful hours that pass, we come with praise and thanks. For all that is our life, for all that is our life, we sing our thanks and praise. For all life is a gift which we are called to use to build a common good and make our own days glad.
As we extinguish the chalice flame, may we carry its light in our hearts. And may we live our lives fully and creatively so that we may be a blessing to ourselves, to each other, and to all those whose lives we touch.